The X470 and Ryzen 2000 launch continues, and today we're looking at a motherboard that had caught a couple of eyes back at CES this year, and that's Gigabyte's X470 Aorus Gaming 7. Right away, I have to say that this is one beautiful piece of hardware, and we'll get to the VRMs and features in just a second, but you've got to appreciate that this thing looks as powerful as it is. The feature that's standing out the most is the heatsink for the VRM. I have to give Gigabyte a massive applause here, as the community have spoken out regarding some of the high VRM temps on some of their previous boards, and the solution here is not only a massive heatsink for the MOSFETs, but also a high quality 10+2 phase design for the VRMs. Some users might not like the look of the heatsink aesthetically, but I've got to say I embrace it 100%, even if it is slightly overkill for this chipset. Like, there could be a fire inside your PC case and I think your VRMs would still be fine. Okay, probably not, but it is running a few degrees cooler than the MSI X470 board that we looked at a couple days ago, and that one has an extra 2 VRM phases to split up the power and heat. I didn't get the chance to test overclocked VRM temps here, but by looking at the graph with the 2700X at auto, you can safely bet that both of these boards are going to run fine when overclocked. Before we talk about overclocking and take a quick look at the VRM layout, let's brush over some of the features here that you should worry about. The postcode readout is located at the right side of the board next to the memory slots for easy visibility, and here we've got a couple of switches. The switch on the left is the BIOS switch, which allows you to switch between your main and backup BIOS, and the switch on the right is simply a switch for whether you want to run the board with a single BIOS. These switches are handy if your overclock does not go to plan and your board pretty much just fails to boot. You've always got that backup BIOS which can come in handy. Now, I would have liked to see an onboard power and reset button here like the MSI board, but we are getting at least a power button and clear CMOS button next to the rear I/O. While we're here, let's talk about what we're working with in terms of ports. USB options are plentiful. We've got 6 3.1 Gen 1 ports, 2 3.1 Gen 2 ports with one Type-C, and we've got a couple of USB 2.0 ports as well as a bit of a backup. We've also got Intel Gigabit LAN and built-in Wi-Fi, and audio via the ALC 1220 codec. Also, the I/O shield comes pre-installed on the board, which is something that is so great to see. I hope we see this in upcoming options as well and become the standard. And the last important feature here that we'll talk about is RGB, which if you're looking for a board with a ton of RGB lighting options, this is the one. The zones include on the I/O shroud, the memory slots, the right of the board, the PCI Express slots, the chipset heatsink, and also on the bottom left of the board covering the audio circuit. It's all controlled via the RGB Fusion software as well, which also means that you can disable it if you decide it's not for you. Okay, now to talk about the VRMs and what's going on underneath that massive heatsink. Now, we're looking at a 10+2 phase setup here, and the controller being used is the IR35201, which is the same controller that we saw in the MSI X470 board. If you watched that video, then you'll know that this is an 8-phase controller, and so the PWM signal is being doubled for the V-Core, and here it's done appropriately via the IR3599, which takes one PWM signal and produces two signals that are 180 degrees out of phase. The discrete high and low side MOSFETs are replaced by a single package here. These are the 40 amp integrated power stages from International Rectifier, the IR3553. So not only are we getting a decent heatsink and 10 phases for the V-Core, but we're also getting some really nice components here under the hood. For a max overclock on the R7 2700X, I was able to reach 4.25 GHz across all 8 cores at a voltage of 1.435 volts reported by Hardware Info. This was only 10 millivolts worse than the 12-phase MSI X470 Gaming M7 and about 15 millivolts better than the 4-phase B350 board. And so this board has a ton of strong points, and in my opinion, it may be one of the best X470 boards out there in terms of all-around features and performance. It looks great, performs well, cooling is adequate for the VRMs, and there's not much bad to say about this board at all. If I had to really nitpick, I'd say that the M.2 covers do look a little bit cheap. I understand that heat dissipation has been the main design goal here, but for such a premium board, I do prefer the integrated hinge design on the MSI X470 board in this regard. Another slight nitpick would be better diffusing of some of the lighting on the board, mainly around the memory slots, as they can be a bit bright at times. And so this board would be a bit overkill for some of the Ryzen 5 chips, but would be a great pair for some of the 8-core options. So an excellent board from Gigabyte, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of it down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, guys, and as always, I will see you all in the next one.